Good morning. Thanks for joining us once again on the Celtic Way for the morning briefing. It's the start of a new week, Monday morning, international week though, Tony and Allison. So things are still moving at a fairly slow pace with regards to Celtic. But what we're going to do this morning, and get involved in the comments, please, if there's anyone that you feel is worthy talking about. We're going to take a look at some of the players throughout the Scottish Premiership that maybe Celtic should consider or maybe are considering signing when we come to the January window or next summer. There's probably about half a dozen or so that are on and off the lips of fans saying that they'd be an improvement to the team. Some good young players, some are already established. And we'll also take a look at some of the ones that Celtic have signed over the past couple of decades from other Scottish clubs that have either been a hit or a miss, and just kind of marry that up in some way. So, Tony, Allison, we'll come to the one I think that is in the best form at the minute. He signed a new deal with his club only recently. He did have a bizarrely low buyout clause for teams out with Scotland. I think that was to actually put off Celtic and Rangers initially. Martin Boyle at Hibs, who's just signed a new 2.5, 3 year deal, I think it is, because he was running out of contract pretty rapidly there. Martin Boyle, Celtic have improved in the wing area over the summer with Abada and Jota coming in, who they will probably sign on a permanent deal next summer. So, Tony, does this mean that there's no room for Martin Boyle anymore? If he came in, he would be largely a squad player?
I think that chase has run a bit cold because I think Celtic are kind of well stocked now, aren't they? You talk about Forrest coming back as well. So they would have Abada, Forrest, Jota, and also young Montgomery that can play out wide as well, So there's a kind of plethora of options there for Celtic. So I don't know if Martin Boyle would be one. I know Neil Lennon was obviously keen on Martin Boyle because he brought him to Hibs and stuff like that. So I think that's one that was maybe, I don't know, but it would surprise me now if Celtic were to sign Martin Boyle. I'm not disputing the merits of the player. I think he's a very good player and he's got pace to burn. So it just depends how Celtic see themselves in terms of options. But I think they've got plenty of options in the wide area and would maybe think Martin Boyle, that train's maybe sailed past.
He's a very direct player, Allison. Eye for goal as well. His goal tally last season, I think he scored 15 in total. He's off to a flyer this season. But do you agree with Tony that he's not a priority?
Yeah, I think Celtic are fairly well covered in those positions. I think obviously Tony mentioned there about James Forrest still to come back too. I think I'm hugely impressed with Martin Boyle. I think he's a fantastic player. I think you see that when he goes out to international football. You see what he's done with Australia and who Australia themselves are on a fantastic run. They've just created a bit of history with their 11-game winning streak, and he's been a pivotal part of that, and he scored goals at that level. So I think he is capable of stepping up. I just wonder just now where he would fit in at Celtic.
Well, what about one of his teammates who Celtic have been linked with fairly often over the last couple of windows? Even though he's only been at Hibs for one season, it was in January. I think Celtic were already being linked with him with a view to a summer signing, which again happened after the Euros but never materialised. Kevin Nisbet, Tony. He's a scorer of goals. He's a penalty box striker. He's now an international player. But Celtic have improved in that regard as well. They signed Kyogo Furuhashi and Georgios Giacomakis. Both of them are barely in the door. So similar to Martin Boyle, does that mean that Kevin Nisbet's no longer a priority?
I don't know if he's no longer a priority because I think Celtic still need another striker. Because Giacomakis hasn't exactly come in and showed anybody what he can do yet. But I still think that Celtic would benefit from another striker being there. And if so, they've been linked with strikers from the J League, similar to Kyogo, and we all accept that that's the player that Ange definitely signed. So if you're going to trust the manager, then he might be able to pluck another gem from the J League. A couple of names have been mentioned, but I still think if they're going to spend a lot of money on a striker, then it might be one from the J League. But if not, maybe try and get a bargain with Nisbet if they can. I still think he remains on their radar, but maybe not, as you say, a priority. But I like Nisbet, and I like what he did with Hibs so far, and I think he could bring that to Celtic. I see him kind of, if he comes to Celtic, having a similar impact to Lee Griffiths, who came to Celtic and set the header alight, so I could see that happening. But whether or not, again, like Boyle, has the trail run cold in that with regards to Celtic, I'm not so sure. But I think I think Ange kind of hinted that he was going to go to the J League maybe for players of that ilk. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's another striker from Japan that comes in for the Japanese leagues.
Well, Nisbet was keen to leave Hibs, Allison, wasn't he? He handed in a transfer request when Birmingham City were after him and Sam Cosgrove. I think it was about $3 million or so that they were looking to get Kevin Nisbet for, and Hibs weren't interested. So it's a bit of an investment, to be honest, at that cost.
Yes and no. I think you're never going to pick up a striker of some repute and with some goals behind them cheaply now. I think you have to be prepared for that. I think your mindset has to be that if you're going to bring in someone who has a decent record in front of goal, that you're going to have to pay a proper amount for it. I think that's just real life. I like Kevin Nisbet as a player. I like his attitude. I like his performances. I do think he's got something to offer. I think he's got an instinct for goals. I think he's got that predatory note just in the 6-yard box that I think Celtic could do with. I like his movement. I think he's definitely one who should be on the radar. I think Celtic need at least one more striker to come in, and I say at least. So I think there would be room for possibly 2 forwards coming in. Whether or not that happens is an entirely different conversation. But I definitely think he would enhance Celtic's forward line.
We'll chat about one more Hibs player then, and I think this is the position where Celtic fans seem to have a feeling of urgency for improvement. It's at left back. Greg Taylor, I think, he doesn't quite split the fan base, but I think some people certainly feel he's good enough. Others think a major upgrade in quality is needed. Would that come in the form of Josh Doig, Tony?
I certainly think Josh Doig has got a lot to offer, but I think Celtic, by giving Greg Taylor a new deal, they seem to be saying, you're our man in that position. Seem to be a kind of, we're going to keep faith in you. When you return, you'll be the stable left back. So I think Celtic have kept faith in Taylor, are going to keep faith in Taylor and see something in him. But anybody that comes in, I think people rightly say you need healthy competition for places in every position. And Josh Doig is somebody who has impressed me with Hibs, and I wouldn't, if Celtic were to sign him, I would be quite happy. But I don't have any qualms about Greg Taylor either. I really like Greg Taylor. I think he's a decent fullback, and as you say, he splits opinion, but I'm firmly in that I think Greg Taylor does a good job. I'll leave it to others to decide if he doesn't.
Yeah, Allison, Josh Doig, he was linked with a move to Watford for some time, hasn't materialised yet. Again, I think Hibs were looking for a wee bit of a sum there, 4 or 5 million for a good young player. Celtic have got Taylor as probably the first choice left back, but also on the books, as actually we're getting in a comment here exactly on that. Bolingoli, Scales, Montgomery can play there. Juranovic has played left back a couple of times. So is that price for a starter? A non-starter, sorry.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. I don't think Celtic will go to £4 or £5 million for another left back when you have a consideration for what's there at the minute. I genuinely don't. I really like the boy up at Aberdeen, Calvin Ramsey's really caught the eye at times. I think I've seen him 3 or 4 times so far this season. He's been excellent. I thought Doig had a decent season last year. I thought he was impressive. I was surprised he remained at Hibs. I think at the towards the end of the window there was a game he was left out. I think it might have been the first game of the season actually at Fir Park. He was left out the starting lineup, and Jack Ross had said that there was considerable interest in him. So I was surprised that it didn't come to fruition and it didn't go further. I think he's a decent left back. I think he's a ton of potential. I just don't think Celtic would shell out that kind of money for him at this point in time.
Well, let's move on to Ramsey then. There's a couple I'd like to discuss up at Aberdeen. I think the right back slot at Celtic is pretty much nailed down by Juranovic. When he's fit, he'll probably play ahead of Ralston, and then Ralston will come in when squad rotation, maybe in the cup games, something like that. But Ramsey's only 18 years old, just turned 18. He started the season really well, and he's going to have a great career ahead of him. Like you, Allison, I've seen quite a lot of him this season for Aberdeen, and he's impressing on almost every time that he takes to the pitch. Now, there have been big names linked with Calvin Ramsey. Man United are apparently keeping tabs on him, Tony. So is he already going to take his next step onto the stone that is past Celtic already in his career?
I think he had a wonderful battle with Jota, didn't he, in the last Celtic game? It was brilliant to watch. The two of them just went at it, and they went at each other, which was very strange, because normally a winger attacks a full-back and gets the better of him, but it was kind of, I think it was honours even, because they both took chunks at each other the whole game, but Jota had the last laugh with the late goal. But he really impressed me because he stood up to that, Ramsey. And that's kind of the first time that I'd actually watched him at close quarters, and I was very impressed with him. And it doesn't surprise me to find that Manchester United and big clubs are scouting these guys, Andy, because see, if you're a big club, that's what you do with your scout network. You go and watch all the best young players in all the top leagues, and then come back with reports and say, he's good. So it's no surprise for me to see Calvin Ramsey on a list like Manchester United. And at this early stage of his career, and he's attracting that attention, then it only goes to show that he will go higher. So it's up to Celtic to maybe say, right, we'll take him now. As you say, an investment if they want him, or if not, then he will go for big money at some point in his career, because he looks to be something quite special.
It's a similar sort of approach maybe to when Celtic signed Frimpong. I think they'd have to pay more money to get Ramsey than they did to get Frimpong, but then in a couple of seasons he'll be moving on for much more money. Allison, does he fit the model perfectly?
Certainly in a business sense he does, and I think he's a boy with incredible potential. I'm not sure that Aberdeen will let him go quickly, or will be reluctant to let him go at this stage at all. But he's certainly caught the eye. I like his physicality. I like his athleticism. I think in that vein he's quite similar. He's quite reminiscent of Kieran Tierney at times, just in terms of his approach and his hunger, a very clear desire and commitment to the game. I think he's definitely a player that should arouse interest. He's definitely a player that you should offer consideration to and be looking at. Obviously, Juranovic is here and Ralston's here at the minute. But I think if you're doing your homework, you should obviously be aware of these types of players. Whether or not they fit your club and fit the model at the right time is another matter.
What about his teammate, Tony Lewis Ferguson? I think we actually had an article on the site written about Lewis Ferguson, a scouting report on him when it was hoped that Celtic would be looking to bolster their midfield options. It didn't really materialise. Now, the description of midfield that the Celtic apparently need right now is a bit more dynamism, box to box, somebody that can get about the park rather than just a graceful playmaker like Rogic and Turnbull. Now, Lewis Ferguson was meant to be moving on from Aberdeen this year. There was pretty much a gentleman's agreement there for him to go to Watford, and then the club pretty much stood in his way, I think, and dug their heels in, which left him a wee bit miffed, to say the least. Now, I think he wants to move on very, very quickly. Would Celtic be a suitable option for him, and would he be a suitable option for Celtic?
I think yes is the answer to both of those questions. Celtic certainly somebody in the midfield who can dig as well. And there's always a persistent rumour with Lewis Ferguson, but it never ever seems to come to anything, does it? It's always rumoured that they're keeping tabs on or that they're looking at, but it's never ever been anything concrete. So I don't know whether it will ever come to fruition, but he's certainly a player that Celtic could do with. But when James McCarthy came in, I thought that maybe put the Lewis Ferguson one to bed. But James McCarthy, like Giakoumakis, has not had a lot of time to show us what he can do. I think a fit James McCarthy could perform a Ferguson role, but McCarthy's certainly not a box-to-box guy, you know what I mean? He's more of a holding player, so I think Ferguson's more of a box-to-box midfielder. He's also very good in the air, as he showed when he beat Nir Bitton to the corner and shouldered it in, or whatever part of his anatomy he put it in with. But and Ferguson scored a few headers, so you're looking at various things that they can offer, and I think Ferguson is an option that Celtic should consider. Whether or not they'll bring him in as MD's guess. But if the player's unhappy at Aberdeen and he wants to leave, then should maybe test the water and see.
Allison, I think Watford bid just over $3 million for him and they weren't willing to negotiate. So where does that leave Celtic?
I think a 4-year contract for James McCarthy probably knocks it on the head, to be absolutely frank with you. I had said actually about 18 months ago in conversation with someone that I thought Lewis Ferguson was a very natural successor to Scott Brown. I think he's just got that element to his game. I think he's got the physical element. I think he can be quite elegant at times too. I think he can score. I think he's got a lot of attributes that would have made him a very good midfielder for Celtic once you obviously remove the family connections, obviously. But I thought he would have been a fantastic Celtic signing. I just wonder now about logistics, given the resources that were spent this summer.
We'll move on to one final player from the Scottish Premiership. We actually had an article go up about this fella yesterday. It's John Souttar at Hearts, Tony. Now, Celtic do have options at centre-back now. Souttar is an injury-prone guy. Let's not kid ourselves on about that. But he started the season really well for Hearts, who in general have started the season really well. And now there's some names down south being linked with him. I think I saw Stoke and Blackburn this morning. Is he one that Celtic should be looking at to bring in at centre-half, even though there are 4 centre-halves if you include Carter Vickers there at the moment?
I think the words injury-prone just strike fear into any potential buying club, especially if you're a defender. I like Souttar. I think he's a terrific footballer. And I think John Souttar would be an asset to any club. But, his track record isn't great, and it's not the player's fault. Just been really, really unlucky. But I think he can offer you a lot. But I just don't think Celtic would be willing to take that risk on somebody like John Souttar. And I read your article, I thought it was terrific. But I know what he brings, but that's bringing it as a footballer, not somebody that might sit in the sidelines, and that's the risk you take with somebody like John Souttar, whose track record goes against him. But I do think he's a genuinely talented and gifted footballer and would be a good defender if anybody bought him. And you're buying him and hope that he plays. That's your big concern. And I think that puts a lot of potential suitors off, as I said.
He's only 20. He's only 25, Allison. So there's plenty of time for Souttar to go and take the next step and try and earn his big move and make his money. I think Craig Levine was on one of the podcasts recently saying that by now, if Souttar hadn't had injury problems, he'd have about 25, 30 Scotland caps, which I think is a quite testament really to the expectation that was on him when he was breaking through as a youngster at United and then gone to Hearts. It's good to see him getting on well this season after his Achilles is been the big problem for him. He snapped it twice through just before lockdown and then through lockdown again. But the thing is, as Tony mentions, that there is that risk that somebody signs him and then a month later he's out for another 6-7 months with an Achilles injury, because it's 3 or 4 times it's really hampered him in his young career.
I'm actually going to look at the flip side of that and say that the mental ability to come back from injuries like that, not once but twice, actually says a lot about the kind of character he is, about the kind of personality he is, about how hard he's probably had to work to get back to the level that he's playing at now. I think that augurs well for him in his own career and development. I think he's been incredibly unlucky. I'm not sure how preventative you could take measures to avoid what happened to him. I think it's just pure bad luck. I think if you go back, sometimes there are cases to be made for players coming in. If you think they can do a job, I think you go back to guys like John Hartson, and remember, Martin O'Neill saying to us, if the hole in his heart, I'm signing him. I know that there's a pre-existing issue here, but I'm taking a gamble because this is what I want in. I think football's moved on, obviously, so much since then, but I think he is a player who has something to offer, and I think he has the capability to step up another level.
Well, one player that I would have proffered on this list would have been Ali McCann at St Johnstone. He moved on at the end of summer there to Preston. I personally think he was the best in that sort of bracket that bigger clubs would have been looking at, but Celtic didn't make the move, and he's away down south. I've taken a note, guys, just looking back over the last couple of decades of some of the players that Celtic have signed from other Scottish Premiership or Premier League, as it was, teams. So there have been a lot of successes. Scott Brown was signed from Hibs. I mean, that is just an absolute stick on there. Armstrong, who was really good for a wee while. Mackay Stephen, Johnny Hayes, Ryan Christie, they all contributed at times to some degree while at their stay at Celtic Park, but they've also got ones that that didn't really work out. Nadir Chief G, I think, sticks out maybe from Dundee United. There was a bit of a waste with the number 7 jersey too. Derek Riordan didn't hit the heights. Do you remember Yusuf Malin was signed by Celtic a couple of summers ago from Kilmarnock?
On Tony's recommendation.
It wasn't my recommendation per se. I wrote a column, and then all of a sudden they'd signed him. It was just bizarre, wasn't it? It was, but hey, because he did well at Kilmarnock to earn that, and then never kicked the ball for Celtic, really.
There was an interesting one. I think it was in the news just now because he's been playing really well for Scotland. Jack Hendry. It didn't really work out for him at Celtic after signing from Dundee, and now he's away to Belgium and going from strength to strength over there. Even going back to the Gordon Strachan era, you've got players like Paul Hartley, Gary Caldwell, Presley, and before that, Stephen Pearson, Rab Douglas. So there are success stories from when Celtic sign other players in the league, some misses as well. But if there was going to be any from the ones that we've spoken about, the 6 that we've spoken about, Allison and Tony, that you would back to be a hit, which one would it be?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Ramsey, probably. Yeah.
Calvin Ramsey. Allison, what about you?
I think I might say Suter.
Yeah, okay.
Just for argument's sake.
Well, look, it will be interesting to see if Celtic do target any of them. I think I agree with you that the Boyle one has probably sailed. Nisbet, I think, is maybe still the one that Celtic might look at, to be honest. There's another comment coming in here reminding another Hibs one that was Chris Killen and Scott Allen when Celtic signed both of them. But yeah, so look, it's certainly ones that we'll need to keep an eye on heading into January and the summer. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Remember, you can subscribe to the Celtic Way for just £1 a month just now, and that will cover you for pretty much the rest of the year at that price, which is great for all the insight and journalism you get with the website. And also subscribe to us on YouTube, and you'll get alerts when we go live every morning for the podcast. So thanks for joining us, Tony and Allison. See you later.
Thank you.
Cheers.